Before the man Daniel faced the hunger of the earthly beasts, he had already walked with the celestial ones. His story is not merely one of survival. It is the ultimate esoteric treatise on the power of an uncompromised spiritual life, a life so radiant it compelled the very forces of nature to bow. We know him as Daniel. But to the architects of the Babylonian Empire, he was known by a different name, a name that spoke of his destiny. Belteshazzar, meaning Bel's prince, or Bel protects his life. Yet, Daniel's allegiance lay not with the false gods of Babylon, the pantheon of Ishtar, Marduk, and Nebo, but with the unseen source, El Elyon, the Most High God. This conflict of names was the first sign of the spiritual war he would fight, a war not with swords but with dreams, visions, and the blinding light of the divine. Daniel was taken from Jerusalem as a youth, a captive of royal lineage, blessed with an ethereal intelligence and a spiritual aptitude that few mortals possess. The Babylonian system sought to deculturize and assimilate him, teaching him the language, literature, and wisdom of the Chaldeans. This was a direct spiritual assault, an attempt to replace his divine grounding with material philosophy. But Daniel's early life was a deliberate path of separation and consecration, a daily esoteric practice. He refused the king's rich food and wine, the contaminated bread of Babylon, choosing instead a simple, disciplined, and spiritually clean diet. This act was not mere asceticism, it was alchemical purification, preparing his body and soul to become a vessel for higher spiritual frequencies. The word used in the Hebrew for this choice implies a resolution of the heart, a firm, non-negotiable spiritual mandate that defined his existence. This profound purity unlocked his greatest powers. Daniel possessed the ability to interpret dreams and read visions, not through mere guesswork or psychological interpretation, but through a direct, immediate connection to the Akashic records, which the ancients knew as the Book of Remembrance. These records are the universal memory bank of all events, past, present, and future, held within the very fabric of the cosmos. Daniel could tap into this infinite well of knowledge because his own vessel was perfectly tuned to the frequency of the divine mind. His wisdom was so celebrated, so utterly supernatural, that the king declared Daniel possessed the spirit of the holy gods. This was the Shekinah principle at work, the radiant, dwelling, and manifest presence of God making its temporary home through a mortal man. The Shekinah acted as an inner sun, a constant source of illumination that dispersed the intellectual fog and spiritual darkness of the Babylonian court. The source of his genius lay not merely in books, but in his unwavering communion with the source. Daniel was a lover of knowledge, a diligent scholar of the ancient texts and prophecies of his people, but his true education came in the silent chamber, where the veil between the visible and the invisible was thinned. It was here, in profound meditative prayer, that he received the 4 apocalyptic visions that would later form the core of his prophecy. These visions, of colossal beasts, horns of blasphemy, and the final appearance of the Ancient of Days, were not random nightmares, but direct, coded blueprints of the spiritual war that governs human history. His friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, known in Babylon as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were his spiritual cohort, his unbreakable circle of light. Their refusal to bow to the golden image was a collective act of spiritual sovereignty. Their unwavering stance in the face of the fiery furnace was not an act of blind bravery, but the result of the collective power of their aligned auras. Their faith was a living, visible force field, a plasma of divine energy that repelled the very flames of death. It was in that fire that the king saw a fourth figure, a being like a son of the gods, the physical manifestation of their protective spiritual resonance. Daniel's power, his wisdom, his prophetic sight, they all emanated from his godness, his meticulously cultivated spirit man. This inner self was not merely a passive soul, it was a colossal, radiant entity, a cosmic self that towered over his physical form. This immense inner self projected an aura of divine sovereignty, a protective field that permeated his every action, his every word, and every space he occupied. This aura was the secret. It was the source of his irresistible political rise, his untouchable wisdom, and his ultimate protection. It was a tangible, spiritual weight that the material world could not ignore. Daniel served two world-shaping empires, Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, and later the Medo-Persian Empire under King Darius. The speed and certainty of his political ascent underscores the spiritual law that divine authority always supersedes temporal authority. King Darius, a figure of immense worldly power, ruled a vast, sprawling kingdom held together by ambition, fear, and intricate bureaucratic systems. Darius's royal house was a golden cage, opulent, powerful, but ultimately ruled by the volatile, earthly desires of men. The king's life was an echo chamber of human ego and temporal authority. He was surrounded by his council of satraps and wise men who claimed mastery over terrestrial knowledge but were utterly blind to the cosmic realities Daniel mastered. These wise men of Darius's court were the king's spiritual opposition. They were the priests of the mundane, practitioners of calculated astrology, and masters of political manipulation. Their power was derived from predictable forces, and they feared Daniel's unpredictable, unquantifiable divine power. They could read the movements of the stars, but Daniel could read the very mind of the stars' creator. Daniel's position was unprecedented. The text specifies he was one of 3 presidents appointed over the entire kingdom, a Hebrew captive with ultimate authority. The king was so impressed that he planned to set Daniel over the whole realm. His brilliance, born from spiritual mastery, ignited a corrosive spiritual jealousy in the hearts of the satraps and other officials, a jealousy that was fundamentally demonic in its origin. They recognized that Daniel's aura of integrity was their greatest obstacle. Their strategy had to shift from the material to the spiritual. They knew they could not defeat Daniel on grounds of competence or honesty. They sought to find a flaw, a breach in his spiritual armor, and found only one point of consistency: his absolute, non-negotiable devotion to his God. The officials devised a trap, a law that targeted the very core of Daniel's being. They persuaded the prideful King Darius to issue an irrevocable decree. For 30 days, no one in the kingdom was allowed to petition any god or man except the king himself. This act was designed to elevate the king to temporary godhood, establishing a terrestrial vortex of worship entirely focused on the human ruler. Darius, intoxicated by the promise of such absolute universal devotion, signed the decree, unaware that he was signing the death warrant for his most vital advisor. The decree was a spiritual weapon masquerading as a political law. It was an attempt to extinguish the brightest light in the kingdom. But Daniel, the sage of the covenant, saw the decree not as a threat, but as an opportunity for spiritual affirmation. The Hebrew word for pray, in Daniel's story, implies a pleading and falling down, a profound posture of submission to the higher power. He did not hide. 3 times a day he opened his window toward Jerusalem, the ancient axis mundi of his people, and prayed, allowing his practice to be witnessed. This was not arrogance. It was an act of cosmic defiance, declaring that the sovereignty of the Most High was greater than the temporary decree of any earthly king. The jealous officials caught him in the act. The spiritual trap sprung shut. Darius, now realizing the full devastating weight of his own prideful decree, was crushed. The laws of the Medes and Persians were irrevocable, a material human construct that even the king's love and authority could not override. Daniel was delivered into the hands of the executors, destined for the lion's den. The lion's den was not just a pit. It was a place of judgment, chaos, and absolute animalistic destruction. It was the mouth of the abyss manifested on earth, designed to consume and erase all evidence of opposition. As the stone was rolled over the pit, sealing the prophet inside, the world went dark, and the battle between the human law of the flesh and the divine law of the spirit was set for its ultimate confrontation. Pause and consider the magnitude of Daniel's choice. Surrounded by a kingdom that worshipped power and gold, he chose a simple, open window and a prayer. He valued his spiritual connection above his life. We are uncovering the deepest secrets of spiritual warfare and manifestation right now. If these revelations on aura, Shekinah, and esoteric warfare are challenging how you view your faith and your power, then you need to be part of this continuing journey. Hit that subscribe button to Godwin Scrolls now, Don't let the algorithms of the mundane bury the truth. Ensure your feed is always aligned with the highest frequency of revelation. Inside the cold, oppressive darkness of the den, Daniel was not alone. The lion's den contained not just a single hungry beast, but a formidable pride of lions, their senses acutely honed to the smell of fear and the promise of flesh. The air was thick with primal darkness, the heavy, chaotic energy of raw, untamed nature. The very presence of the lions was meant to strip the human mind of all spiritual resolve. But as Daniel descended, something extraordinary happened, something that transcended the natural law of predator and prey. Among the pride was a lion unlike the others. We shall call him Leo, a magnificent scarred alpha, whose golden-maned head was currently lifted, not in hunger but in profound, almost hesitant stillness. Leo had been a force of brute survival, ruling his corner of the den with violence. But in the presence of Daniel, the law of his animal nature was utterly silenced. Leo was a divine instrument, an emissary sent by the Ancient of Days. He was placed in the den not to be a guardian angel in the conventional sense, but to be the physical anchor for the spiritual mandate of protection. God did not violate the lion's nature. He introduced a superior spiritual frequency that rendered the lower frequency inert. As Daniel stood in the center of the pit, he was enveloped, not by terror, but by the full, blinding intensity of his own cultivated aura. This was his godness, the Shekinah that had guided him through dreams and protected his friends in the flames, now manifesting as a tangible, protective field. The other lions, their instincts raging, crept forward, driven by the primordial force of hunger. They saw the human form, the flesh, the vulnerability. But when they crossed the threshold of Daniel's aura, their predatory energy met an immovable wall of divine force. Their senses were overwhelmed, not by a physical barrier, but by the profound spiritual gravity of Daniel's presence. They felt the towering presence of his spirit man, that magnificent, colossal entity he had built through decades of discipline and communion. To the lions, Daniel did not smell like flesh, he smelled like sovereignty. He smelled like the authority that commanded the very breath in their lungs. And Leo? Leo was the first to recognize this transcendent signal. He was compelled, not by an external command, but by the overwhelming, palpable truth radiating from Daniel. The prophet's aura, a field of serene, quiet power, reached out and recalibrated Leo's nature. Leo approached, his massive frame trembling, not with aggression but with reverence. He lay down at Daniel's feet, positioning himself as the guardian of the gate. His action was not simply obedience, it was a demonstration of a higher spiritual hierarchy. He used his physical dominance, his alpha energy, to enforce the divine peace that Daniel's aura had established. Any lion that dared to approach Daniel was met with the silent, formidable warning of Leo's presence, the sentinel of the divine mandate. Leo was mirroring the spiritual action. He was standing guard over the vessel of the Most High. All night, Daniel rested in the center of a profound paradox, surrounded by death, yet resting in absolute peace. His safety was not a miracle of physical circumstance, but the inevitable result of spiritual preparation. He had done the esoteric work. The physical protection was merely the effect. This moment, Leo, the alpha predator, reduced to a peaceful guardian by the sheer spiritual force of one man, is the ultimate proof of the power we discuss. The natural order bows to the supernatural. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by the chaos of the world, this is your wake-up call. We are dedicated to delivering this uncompromised, high-frequency spiritual truth. Take a moment right now and subscribe to Godwin Scrolls. Join the community that is learning how to build an aura so powerful, the lions of this life become your protectors. When the king arrived at dawn, his voice echoing with desperate grief, he found Daniel whole. "My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths," Daniel declared. But the deeper esoteric truth is that the angel was the embodiment of the aura Daniel had built. The mouth that was shut was not just the lions, it was the mouth of chaos, the mouth of fear, the mouth of the abyss. The king, in his final decree, recognized the eternal power. His kingdom shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. Darius was proclaiming the sovereignty of a God whose laws override those of the Medes and Persians. The punishment of the accusers reinforces the lesson. The lions, now unchecked by the protective field of Daniel's aura, instantly consumed the men and their families. Without the higher frequency of Daniel's presence, the den returned to its natural, destructive state. The lesson of Leo and the lion's den is the ultimate esoteric teaching on self-mastery. You are a dual being. You are flesh and you are spirit man. The limitations, fears, and threats you face in the physical world, the kamis and tohu viebohu of your own life, can only be overcome when your spirit man is fully grown, when your godness is fully realized. We are called to do the work Daniel did, to purify the vessel, to consecrate the mind, to seek the secrets of the Ancient of Days. We must build an aura of such spiritual gravity and sovereignty that the external chaos, the metaphorical lions of addiction, anxiety, disease, and fear, cannot cross the boundary of our protective field. The power of God is inherent within the man who chooses to cultivate it. Your true salvation is not simply a future event. It is a present, tangible defense mechanism built through daily communion and uncompromising spiritual allegiance. When you invest in the vast, colossal presence of your spirit man, your physical form becomes merely the anchor for a divine force field. The chaos must obey the light. The animal must obey the sovereign. Build your godness, and you will find that even the alpha lions of your darkest den will not consume you. They will lie down at your feet, compelled by the undeniable protective truth of the aura you project. This is the hidden history, the esoteric truth of Daniel. He was saved by the divine law he chose to embody. His life is an eternal invitation for all of us to become guardians of the gates within our own souls, and to watch as the world outside is compelled by the light we bear. The final command is not just to believe but to build. This journey into the hidden truths of Scripture, from the Shekinah to the Akashic records, is a continuous process of activating your inherent divine potential. Don't let this powerful revelation stop here. Subscribe to Godwin Scrolls now. Join our community of seekers who are building your spirit man to its highest potential. Click the notification bell so you never miss a blueprint for true spiritual power. Go and build your aura.